Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started.
So we finally have the ability to respond to reviews in the App Store.
Yay!
We've been waiting for this for a while. We probably thought it would never come. It was announced, about 2 months ago or something like that. Now we finally have it. The way they've implemented the system is actually pretty good. You know, it's pretty much what you would hope it would be, in that when you respond to a review, Apple notifies the user with an email and says, hey, the developer responded with this. Would you click here if you'd like to update your review? And the person can do that. So it's actually it's a pretty nice system. All the reviews are in iTunes Connect. You can browse all the regions and everything. So I think they did a pretty good job with it. And now I think the interesting part to discuss today is, now that we have this system as developers, what are the best ways we can actually use it? What should we do? What shouldn't we do? What are the risks? What's worth doing? And I think there's a good approximately 30-minute discussion to be had there. What do you think?
I think so, yeah. I think I would absolutely agree with that I'm very glad they've done this, and I think the way they did it works well. As at least it's early days still, but it seems like it wasn't one of these things where we finally got what we were asking for, but they did it in a way that was awkward or cumbersome or annoying for the most part. Like the interface in iTunes Connect. So if you just in case you're trying to find this and you haven't, so if you go to a particular app, you go to the Activity tab, and then you go to Ratings and Reviews, which is an area that has actually always been there, or it's been there for a very long time. But now suddenly there's a reply button at the side of each review, as well as a whole lot of really good filters that you can apply to it. So you can see all your reviews. You can see reviews that you've responded to, reviews that you haven't responded to, reviews that were changed as a result or after you responded to them, which is also a really helpful thing. So you can get a sense of if it's actually working, as well as filtering, by different versions of the app or different, how critical they are. Like if you want to see all your 1-star reviews, your 5-star reviews, it's a really good, solid, like you would hope, interface. I mean, the only slight niggle I have about it, which is only really applies to me, because I have so many apps, is that I have to go through each app individually to check on the new reviews, rather than there being a consolidated interface for it. But that's just because I'm strange and have dozens of apps. But otherwise, it's overall mechanically is really nice, and they show up pretty well in the App Store. I always kind of wonder how many people actually read the reviews in the App Store versus just looking at the star rating. But it shows up that it truncates the review you responded to, like it always does, at about 3 lines, and then below it just says like developer response, and your response shows up right below there. And that's probably actually a little pro tip that I thought of when I started doing my reviews response. Once I thought of it, it's like, oh, of course, that's where I should start. Because right now you probably have an app with, if you have an app of any volume, you have, maybe hundreds of reviews to look at. It's like, which one should I start looking at for responses? And the first thing I did is just open the App Store, go over to the reviews tab, and see which are the first ones to show up in that list.
Exactly.
Because that is by far the most likely reviews that anyone is ever going to read. It's very unlikely that people are going to be paging through all the way to the bottom of that list. Like maybe, but especially that number 1 review below your star rating, make sure that there's a good response to that. Because often that can often also be slightly critical, because I think the sorting of that list is not chronological. I think it's
most helpful.
Yeah,
but it's kind of vague. Like I don't think that's purely based on like the number of like upvotes and downvotes and like the was this helpful thing. I don't think it's only that. I think there's other factors. It's hard to tell. But if you leave the sorting in iTunes Connect at the default that it loads up with, it's that sorting. So and you can always go on your phone and look at the App Store to just verify that that's still the way it's sorted. But yeah, that because like I feel like you have to decide, as a way to spend your time and as a way to take the risks, which we'll talk about, of this system, you have to decide, like, are you mostly doing it to address that particular reviewer and to talk to them directly, or are you mostly doing it to show other people who are reading the reviews, your point of view on it, or to correct falsehoods, or to appear to be caring about your customers, or things like that? So if you're mostly responding to reviews like to the public, basically, in that latter way, rather than to the individual reviewers, then it makes sense to really only spend your time addressing a few of the top ones in each region. Because again, as you said, like most people are not going to be paging through 200 reviews of an app. Like that's, if you're lucky enough to have that many, it's going to be the top handful at most, and after that it's severely diminishing returns. So it doesn't make sense to spend a ton of time responding to every single review from the last 4 years or whatever, because most people are never going to see that.
Yeah, and I think too, it's the perspective that I take with these things is that these are marketing statements first and foremost. They can be helpful to the person that I'm responding to, but because this is a public-facing, this is text that is public-facing, that is on the App Store page for my app, which is like where I put all of my other marketing copy. Like, it is important that these are written in such a way that they are useful and helpful to anybody who's trying to think about if they want to download my app. And so, which essentially becomes marketing. And you can still, write them to the person. It's not like this has to be some kind of stilted PR speak type of response. But it's in the back of your mind when you're writing these reviews. It's, how would I write this? I'm less writing this to this one person than I am to the hopefully hundreds or thousands of people who might read this when they're browsing the app. Because the strange thing with reviews is they're very like point in time. Someone came, wrote, say that you have the classic kind of like the 1-star. It's like, I hated this app. It was useless. I deleted it right away, and they leave that as a review. Well, that user is unlikely to come back. They've deleted the app. Like, you're kind of done with them. You can still usefully write a response to that, where you might show interest in terms of saying, I'm so sorry you had a bad experience. If you have any problem, if you have specific concerns or complaints, please by all means email me. Here's my support address or something like that, which is a marketing message that I'm engaged, I'm interested, I care about my users, even if this one person had a bad experience, which can be useful. Or someone who, I wish it did X, it doesn't, 1 star. And you can respond to that person and say, hey, actually it does, or that's great. That's a great suggestion. We'll see if we can work that into a future update maybe. But whatever that is, you're writing these with the expectation of, someone is opening the App Store. They're going to reviews. They're reading these reviews, especially if they're reading a negative review. It's having a slight counterpoint that's right below it, something that they can at least see a response to, so it doesn't just stand there on its own as a negative message.
In deciding which ones to respond to, I've seen a lot of developers talk about, on Twitter or on different podcasts. I've seen a lot of people mention like the idea of, well, I don't want to like set the wrong expectations of my customers, or like train people to expect certain things will always get responses or won't always get responses or whatever else. Or, one thing you can think about is like, if you respond to every review, that might create an incentive for people to 1-star review you to just get your attention, and because they know you're listening. I think these are all wonderful concepts, but I think in reality, this is out of our control. Because the reality is, whatever standards that people will expect, whether people will expect reviews or will expect responses to their reviews or not, whether they will, think that that reviewing your app or especially 1-starring your app will get your attention or not, that will be decided globally, like among the entire App Store. And just the people using it, like their thoughts and the kind of norms and culture that comes around that. Whatever you do with your individual app is not going to affect that at all. Like whatever people will come to expect with whether they get responses or not, and whether it's worth 1-starring and yelling at people or not, that's out of our hands. That's being decided. It's already been decided. Like that battle is over. People already were using reviews, angry 1-star reviews to try to get our attention. They already do the thing where like they hold the star hostage and things like that. If you're lucky if they only hold 1 star hostage. Yeah. That's out of our hands. And so whether or not you respond to your reviews, or how many of your reviews you respond to, has nothing to do with what your customers expect from you. And you are not setting their expectations or setting their incentives. The entire App Store is. So you should probably just go along with what people will expect to happen, regardless of what that is.
Yeah, and I think, too, it's also important to keep in mind how small a proportion of your user base we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Like, it is easy, I think, and this is part of why when I say, like, I think this is first and foremost a marketing thing and why I was really hopeful that one day we would be able to respond to reviews, is a very small percentage of your users can have a disproportionate impact on your appearance in the App Store. In terms of, I don't have to have actually looked at what the numbers are, but I imagine it's, at least hundreds, if not thousands to one for people who actually leave a review in the App Store. And amongst those, the vast majority leave just star ratings rather than words. So you're ending up with, a fraction of a percentage probably of your users that are leaving these written reviews that get responses. And, the vast majority of my support, like my actual customer support, is going to come through the support links and things within the apps itself, that they're not going to be coming through the App Store. And it's like my goal is, in a weird way with these, is like it's damage control in some ways, because if someone writes a glowing review, 5 stars, this is awesome. Like, there's nothing really for me to do, and like throwing in a like thanks, that's awesome. Like, that feels a little weird and like empty. If there's a 5-star review that has a question in it, answering the question maybe makes sense, but mostly what this is a tool for me to clear up misunderstandings or clear up issues where, somebody is just saying something that's untrue, or, like they're missing the point, or they didn't find the feature. Like, it's a way for me to communicate, not to that person. I mean, I want to tell that person, but like that's one person out of thousands that I can hopefully help, which is, nice, but it's not nearly as impactful as the, hopefully hundreds or thousands of people who will come to your App Store page and you can communicate to them, whatever that message is. And so don't get too stuck either on like it's like training this individual person. Like, it's such a small proportion of your actual users, that it probably matters less there. And if anything, it's like, if you want to train your users to get in contact with you when they have problems or wherever that is, it's like, be responsive to your email, I suppose, like, and make that a place that people can feel like they can vent their, their unease or problems they have in the app. But like, yeah, wouldn't get too wrapped around the axle about like, ooh, it's like, trying to be clever about this. It's like, no, just look at your reviews and see which ones you can add value to in responding to.
We are sponsored this week by Linode. Linode gives you fast, powerful hosting for your projects that you can set up in just seconds. They have easy-to-understand tools. You can choose your resources, choose your Linux distro, and this gives you the power and flexibility that you need no matter what you're building on Linode. And Linode plans now start at just $5 a month for a Linux server with 1 gig of RAM in the Linode cloud. And whether you're just getting started with your very first web server or you're deploying a complex system, Linode is the right choice. It's never been easier to launch a Linode cloud server. They offer the fastest hardware and network with fantastic customer support behind it all. They guarantee 99.9% uptime for server availability, and it's great for tasks like running a private Git server or hosting large databases or running a mail server or running powerful web apps and so much more. They also have awesome new pricing options available. So, as I mentioned, you can get a new server with just 1 gig of RAM for just $5 a month. Now, again, like when I first got my first VPS, my first virtual private server, in something like 2007 or 2008, it was 128 megs of RAM for $60 a month. This is 1 gig of RAM for $5 a month. That same $60 a month will now buy you 16 gigs of RAM. So we've come more than 10 times as much RAM as what I used to buy for the same price. It's just incredible. All my stuff is on Linode. I host everything there. I love hosting things there. It's actually pleasant. It's a great service to use. I have really no issues with it over the years. I've been there for quite some time now, and I just love it. All of Overcast is there. It's so nice to use. As a listener of this show, if you sign up at linode.com/radar, you will not only be supporting us, but you also get $20 towards any Linode plan. And they offer a 7-day money-back guarantee. There's nothing to lose. So go to linode.com/radar. To learn more, sign up and take advantage of that $20 credit, or use the promo code RADAR2017 at checkout. Thank you so much to Linode for supporting this show and everything I host on the internet.
So I think it probably makes sense now to dive into just a little bit of the kind of what are the good reviews to respond to, and which are ones that we should just let be. And like the first ones that come to mind on the let it go side of things is being very careful to get sucked into like I don't know, like snarkiness, or people who are just like, there's sometimes people just like writing reviews that are mean or angry or aren't really on topic. And in general, it's like, as with most things on the internet, like arguing with people on the internet is never really a good idea. And so whenever I see these kinds of reviews, it's probably best to be like, there's not much that I could gain from diving into this. Like maybe if it was the number one, like if it showed up as the top review in the App Store, it might be something that was be worthwhile trying to kind of, at least show an engagement there. But trying to go back and forth with somebody who clearly is just kind of mad and was using this review as a way to vent that is unlikely to be productive. Whereas probably good reviews to talk about are ones where there's a clear misunderstanding or question. And like, as I've been kind of browsing a little bit in these are the areas that I think are the best opportunities for us. That, when you look at a review and someone is saying, it's like, I mean, in some ways it's like the old hostage star situation where someone's like, oh man, it's a 4-star app. It would be 5-star if it did X. And if it actually does do X, like if it's just like, oh, sorry, the UI didn't help you find the feature. If you go to the third tab or you go into settings, you can turn that on. Like that's a great example of a place that you can, as from a marketing perspective, that's useful, because if someone was going to say, oh, I like this app, but according to this review, it doesn't actually, do this kind of feature. And the developer says it does. Great. Like that's, or even probably moreover, it would be, because I think the written reviews stick around beyond multiple versions, I think.
I don't know. And that could obviously change over time, but right now I'm pretty sure. I think they don't actually, unless they're edited.
Maybe,
but I'm not positive on that.
Yeah, but it's also worth clearing up too if someone had a problem that was then fixed in a subsequent release. In general, just saying that is probably a helpful thing. Because it is a funny thing, because you just want to find these places where you can have these positive engagements. I don't know what you think about this, but like there's a lot of, I remember people were asking initially or talking about it of, should we respond to every review? Should each review have a response below it?
And geez, that's a simple answer. No. That's really easy.
A lot of times those responses are just end up being like, thank you, or good point. Like that kind of response, I don't think is actually productive. That I think it just kind of is distracting, probably. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people would love to see all these little, like, someone says something nice about you and you say thank you. Like, I guess that's polite. That's the polite thing to do, is to say thank you when someone says something nice about you. But it seems counterproductive in a lot of ways. I mean, the main benefit, in a weird way, like, and this is just the way my mind works, I suppose, is by doing that, you are increasing the amount of space on the screen that the positive review took up. So it emphasizes it slightly. Like if someone has a 5-star review, one of the issues that we have here is that, again, what I said earlier, like whatever most apps do, or the most popular apps do, is going to be what people assume and expect. I think one of the big problems is that most apps that most people actually use are made by big companies, and the big companies are either going to not respond, or they're gonna have somebody whose job it is to basically be a canned response, similar to like if you @mention on Twitter like some big brand like Comcast or whatever, then they're gonna have some intern whose job it is to try to placate you with a canned response, and we're gonna have that on the App Store reviews too. And so if people get used to that, anything you say in like a general response to a positive one, they are going to assume is not genuine. They're going to assume that this is just like a form letter that you say to everybody, which it actually might be. And I don't think that looks good to people. People see right through that, and again, they're going to be coming to your app with the assumption that this is a canned response. Like one of the reviews that I gave, I was trying to placate somebody who 1-starred me, and their review showed up pretty high, and
they were complaining about, just some of the design changes I did in 3.0. And it took me a while. I wrote this response. It took probably 15 minutes to write, even though it's like two sentences. But that's because, the famous thing, like I forgive my letter for being so long. I would have written a shorter one, but I didn't have time. Like I started writing a whole bunch of different ways to address this. And it took me a good 15 minutes to come up with like the two sentences that I actually thought I should say here. And it was very much, it was like kind of a general statement of like, I'm sorry this design isn't working for you. I try to please as many people as I can, but sometimes that's not possible, something like that. And the guy edited his review and clearly thought that was a canned form response, even though I had never written it to anybody else before, and it took me 15 minutes to compose those two sentences. He just assumed because it kind of sounded like a canned response, like I'm sorry, I couldn't help you here or whatever else. And he probably assumes that any response that is kind of like that on an App Store review is just a canned response, and there's no thought behind it, even though in this case there was tons of thought behind it. And so you have to take that risk too. Like again, like what are people going to expect from the entire App Store as a whole is going to impact the assumptions they go into when they see your response. And I don't think a basic like, hey, thanks for reviewing us, like I don't think that is productive. I don't think people want that. And I think if you did that, people would not receive it as well as you might think. It might seem like overly eager or creepy or just kind of desperate. And I don't think that's a good look.
Yeah, and I think that's probably in general, like I think this is an area where probably less is more, right?
Yeah.
It's one of these things that I think we could easily get carried away with using, and it's like it's time spent. That I mean, I think it's a wonderful tool for us, and there are areas like especially for those like those top reviews, having good answers for those like makes a lot of sense. But I think this very easily could become this rabbit hole of if trying to squeeze too much out of this feature is almost certainly going to become counterproductive. Is going to be something that is taking time away from the actual thing that will make your app a 5-star app, which is making your app better. The switching, convincing one person to give you one more star is nice. But making your app better with a new version that is going to address the problems that people are having, like that's a much more robust and sustainable solution, rather than getting into lots of little issues with this. And I mean, especially it's one of these things that some people are writing reviews for very different reasons, right? Like it is something that we don't control. And especially because it's not this venue where it's, this nice threaded conversation. Like you can say something and then they can say something, and they're doing it by like updating their review. And so you can end up with these very disjoint kind of situations if you go too far down that road. So in general, less is more probably. And I think for the question of how far back to go, like I heard, I think it was on Core Intuition. I think it was Daniel Jelka was saying that he was responding to reviews from like years ago. That just kind of blows my mind. It's like, I think in general, keeping this fairly current is something that makes sense. That, responding to reviews as they come in makes some amount of sense. And in this initial period, maybe responding or at least reading and deciding if you want to respond to all the reviews for the current version seems about reasonable. But beyond that, I probably wouldn't go too much farther back.
Yeah, and kind of expanding a little bit on the less is more angle. Again, keep in mind, as you mentioned, that you're posting this response, but then the user who wrote the review is prompted and will likely edit the review. And so you have to make sure that if somebody, assuming that you're not going to be keeping on top of every single response you write to see if the person edited it and then see if you need to edit your response and everything, like that's not productive. So keep in mind, though, that your response might not make as much sense if the user's review is heavily edited after you gave the response. And so write the responses with that in mind. So for instance, one of the responses I wrote, and I haven't actually done that many of them, honestly, but one of the responses I wrote was one of the top reviews was asking about battery life, saying the new version seemed to use more battery life. And so in my response, I didn't really specifically call out like, anything in particular about the question that was asked. I gave a more kind of general response about battery usage in the app, and I said basically like, here's the kinds of things that make any podcast app use more battery power, here, like playing fast, using the screen brightness and the speaker and everything else. And I was like, I've tested Overcast. I test Overcast against other podcast apps, and I try to make sure it's always comparable or better. But if you've figured out anything else, please let me know. And I'm always trying to find out, any areas I might have missed, something like that, right? And so I gave an answer that no matter what the review is edited to, that will still basically make sense as a standalone written piece there. And I think it's important to do that because, again, like whatever you respond to, the user who wrote the review can then edit the review to say anything. So if you just say like, I agree, the person can respond to the review saying this app sucks. And then, or the person can edit the review saying this app sucks. And then your response is there saying, I agree. Like, so you have to always make sure that you are accounting for the fact that the thing you're responding to can change at any time to say anything, and make sure that your review still makes sense in that context.
Yeah, and it's just it's so. I mean, the nice thing is in iTunes Connect you can sign up to get notifications when users change reviews that you responded to, so at least you can track that down a little bit. There's a filter in iTunes Connect, but still, like, it's definitely good advice to keep that in mind, that you don't control the other end of this, and this is all in the public. It's all public facing, not just like on a public website. Even it's like right on your App Store page. The last thing that I wanted to just sort of touch on briefly, I think, is the mental health aspect of responding to reviews.
Oh boy.
Because, and this is, so it's probably worth saying that I went through and did a little bit of responding to reviews, but after that initial wave of just like making sure I understand how this process works and what it looks like, I've, I just like I do for my customer support, I've, outsourced the actual day-to-day operation of responding to reviews to someone else. I have someone else who responds to my first level customer support, and now I have someone who is, on a very part-time basis, but is taking, is responding to the reviews in the App Store. And the main reason why I do that, it's nice from it's from a time perspective, it frees me up a little bit and so on. But the main reason why I do that is because I find reading reviews of my own products can be very detrimental from a motivation, from a happiness, self-worth, all kinds of very significant things can happen.
Yes.
And this is one of these things where reading one really mean, pointed review about yourself, is always the thing that sticks with you. It's not the thing that, if someone writes this glowing 5-star review about how much they love the app, that's nice. And I wish it stuck with me more, but it's almost always, it's these mean, intentionally vindictive kind of reviews that people will write. And, so that's why, for me, I decided, I'm just in the same way that I haven't really been reading my App Store reviews very much over the last few years. It's this is not a reason for me to get back into that game, that I remember what that did, cognitively to me. And so it's what? I will just pay a little bit of money to have someone else do that, because for them, it's not personal. For them, it's not that same thing when they're, if someone's attacking the product that I made, when it feels like they're attacking me. Whereas, if someone else is slightly more, separated from that product, it's more just a job. It's a thing. And it almost has more of a comedy to it, perhaps. So it softens the blow. And so just something to keep in mind, that while this is a useful tool, while this is something that I'm glad we have, be careful, and at least be cognizant of the impact that it is having on you, and be careful about then how you do that, and when in the day you do that, or how you're feeling emotionally. This is if this is something that you're doing and you're feeling really sad or down that day, maybe don't go read your App Store reviews. That's unlikely to make you feel better.
Yeah, I would say that's good advice in general. In general, you don't need to read your App Store reviews very often or very closely. I think it's important to do what we said earlier, view them in the same way that the public views them. So look at your store page occasionally and see which ones are on top and see what your average is. And I don't think you need to go much further than that in both reading them or responding to them. I have found the same thing, that reading my App Store reviews is almost never a good thing for my motivation or my mental state. And so I mostly just don't do it, and I'm very happy not doing it. And that will probably continue. So anyway, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.